Welcome to DisNewsYouKNow Podcast. My name's Martin. On the inside capsules talk about disputing news in the UK, which explore the stories and give a little opinion. All the news that's out there for disputing news, several people news affects our lives, is still underreported, and generally, as many of us already know, we are underrepresented in the media. Saying this podcast is a little effort to try and address that balance. Some to the news, and the first story is from the news service, and the headline is Mr. Meets signing off for an order that led to widespread cuts to access to work. Since Mr. Meets admitted signing off for an order that led to widespread cuts to disabled people's access to work support packages since they have come to power. Disabled campaigns have been warning for the year due to pay cuts and inconsistent decisions on the access to work claims. Well, they've also been mounting concerns about lengthy wait lists for decisions on claims. But when Social Security and Disability Minister Sir Stephen Timms was challenged by an MP on the apparent cuts earlier this summer, he insisted that no changes had been made to access to work policy, although work was underway to improve scheme decision-making by applying the guidance required to consistency. He still insists the Minister had made no changes to access to work policy. But Stephen Timms has admitted Disability News Service that he signed off on the order of access to work staff to apply the guidance more scrupulously after being presented with a proposal from civil servants, which they submitted to him to approve. And confusion over who was responsible for the move began when DNS asked him who in Department of Work and Pensions had asked access to work civil servants to carry out the demand to be more scrupulous in applying the guidance. He replied, well, the department, I guess, asked if it was definitely not him. He said, I'm not sure. I don't want to give you a misleading answer. But when asked by DNS why he thought access to work staff was suddenly following guidance by scrupulity, he said he had no doubt. Seeing his submission, which I have said okay to, saying that he was scrupulously applied to achieve consistency of everything else. He added, the way things work is the proposal goes into submission, which comes to me and I say, okay, it's very likely that I've been advised that we're going to apply this guidance more scrupulously. During an interview at Labour's annual party conference in Liverpool, Sir Stephen said he could not remember when he signed off on the order, but that he would find out. But when DNS suggested it would then be possible to score his orders for a freedom of information request, he stated that DWP would resist the request, because such an order had been advised to ministers, which would not be released under Freedom of Information Act, even though the instructions would then have been sent out to all relevant access to work staff. Just minutes earlier, he had claimed that label DWP ministers were very substantially changing the culture of the department in a pro-transparency direction. Sir Stephen then claimed the order to access to work staff might have been written down and might have been passed on to conversation staff meeting. Who knows those promulgated. Okay, and that's the flavour of the article. Just goes into more quotes. I'm not really sure what the headline is really. Minister signs off an order. Because, well, that's usually how it works. The fact that he's not aware of who signed off just seems like the usual politician. Rhetoric that we get really, and it's trying to avoid kind of scrutiny, particularly if it's at a Labour Party conference, trying to avoid in the moment scrutiny. But it's no surprise he would have signed off on it. He would have sent that, and even the cuts. I said a few episodes ago that more cuts will come in, and really, what do we expect? Because we heard this was in the pipeline. And it's a shambles. I mean, I find myself repeating myself episode after episode, same things really, but, essentially, access to work needs to be just redesigned and rethought about. And, it needs to lead to access to work, which is, it doesn't lead to at the moment. It's a barrier to work, if anything, no scheme, and it seems to be taught that way. It must be all the way, it seems to be. Well, I've said it many times before, in my opinion, just my opinion, that it's a lot of these schemes or reforms that were brought in, particularly in the Brown years, particularly in relation to disability. You know, he didn't get the reputation of Ted Antonio for no reason, and I felt like a lot of these legislations were kind of defunct. From both experience, work life when it's work, a lot more around disability policy and stuff. It just felt like a lot of legislation was defunct. It's like it gave the appearance of rights for disabled people, but in reality, when you question the service and try to access these rights, there were just barriers all over the place, and that was whether it was work, whether it was social care, whether it was housing. The actual legislation dams all shiny and bright, and actually when you pull back a couple of hairs, there's no real meat and bones to it, which is actually has played out what we've seen. We've seen it with the DDA. I know that was brought in under a Labour government, and access to work probably wasn't, but a lot of the add-ons and additions that have happened to those legislations did happen under a Labour government, and then of course the Tories came in, first of all the coalition, and then them in their own rights, and they carried on kind of the work of dismantling very much a lot of their legislation that they, Badger and Major brought in the late 80s, early 90s, which, that's sort of promote them, because, as I've said before previously, a lot of these legislation were brought in at a time when, yes, there was pressure, there was undoubted pressure from disabled campaigners, extension and so forth, but the timing of those coincided with the need for cuts in certain areas, and how those legislations in terms of community care coincided, as many of us already know, with the need to reduce costs. So yes, it was about rights, but also it was about kind of redesigning services in a more cost-effective way, and the two went hand in hand in terms of the way the government designed them. And there's no doubt that a lot of these legislations that have been brought in don't do what they say on the tin, and as we just said, a lot of the rights that they designed to give disabled people haven't been realised in full, in some cases at all, and the ideas around the legislation don't fit what they actually are, and what the legislation actually delivers. But access to work is a big one, really, because especially in the culture we're in at the moment, in terms of the the ableist rhetoric around benefit cuts and welfare reforms, it's like I've said, it just feels like a disabled person being captured every single day, because you have the strange rhetoric that's been around for 15, 16 years around space. But it's been around for 15, 16 years. And now you've got access to work, which is increasingly getting more draconian and harder to get. And it's like, well, they want you to work, but they don't want you to work, because even if you do find a job, it's very hard to keep that job, not because you're, any proven ability or inability to do the job. It's simply because mechanisms that allow you to access that job, or access to work, don't work for you. And you look at housing, the same thing. You look at transport, the same thing. The same barriers are there. And, they've been told that, we're not active members of society, but, can't get accessible housing, social care goods, we can't get the support to actually live independently at home, we can't get the support to actually get a job in the job, try and get benefits. You told your peers on society, you can't actually get anywhere in society because the constraints on transport, etc. and so forth. So it's just feel like being constantly gaslit, and then the item on the cake is this because once they've totally eroded any self-worth, of any value, of any self-esteem, question self-esteem, well, yeah, great, brilliant, it isn't you, it's essential. You feel like you're an angel, yes, and, obviously, I shouldn't have said that bit, because I'm being a bit flippant, and it's not flippant legislation, but you get where I'm coming from. It just feels like it's a dystopian nightmare for disabled people at the moment, and, we really need to fight against it and rebuild the movement, which is going to be easy, but we need to provide our own answers. I know we shouldn't have to, but like I've said in previous episodes, no one's coming to save us. And, no political party out there is interested in disabled people. I'm sorry, I don't believe they are. And, everyone's crying out for socialism. So then it's not the answer for disabled people. I don't think so like that. I think you've seen in the past any political party that seems to sympathise with disabled people only seems to do it as a kind of uses as a kind of a stick to beat the opposition with to win the argument. They don't really have any real vested interest in disabled people and build a lot for us, because we yet to see, I need to any awareness of completely blind to anything any of the major parties come out with a manifesto for disabled people that addresses, well, I say any, but the very best, very, very little of the holistic needs that we have. Because, you can talk about social care, you can talk about benefits, but, we, just like everybody else, we abandon individuals, and we need a holistic approach. I think it was on the last episode I talked about where, a report from which talked about disabled flowers being left out of green technology as a perfect example of, in terms of climate change, disabled people on, and not even on the radar in terms of that. And it's like we're not seeing this holistic 3D, all-round individuals, and we have all those needs. And so our needs aren't just about, okay, we've got core needs, which are healthcare and social care, but we've got all the aspirations in its education, whether it's, housing, whether it's employment, whether it's, marriage, etc., and so forth, leisure activities, etc., and so forth, ambitions to build businesses and whatever that might be, or creative industries and representation there, and bring creative vision to life, etc., and so forth, all of that. So it's a holistic view, and I'm yet to see a political party that addresses any of those needs for disabled people at all in the last 15 years, other than address piecemeal token offerings to obey, issues around cuts, really. So, no one's coming to save us, as I've said many times before. Sad, but it's true. Next story comes from the Mobility Foundation, and the headline is National Centre for Accessible Transport has appointed Emma Barlow as its new Chief Executive Officer. Emma will join NCATS from her role as Director of Engagement and Accessibility Transport Report, where she played a central role in developing inclusive transport solutions throughout the UK. Emma possesses extensive experience in accessibility in transport, having devoted her career to enhancing travel experience for disabled people. She was named ongoing in the UK and most influential disabled person Short Trust Disability Power 100 in 2024. Until employment chief executive Lisa Jones said the Mobility Foundation believes that all disabled people should be able to make the journey they choose and look forward to working closely with NCAT and Emma Barlow as a type of evidence and inside the sector needs to inform a more inclusive transport system. Emma officials in the role on 24th of November of this year. Well, it's a bit of optimism. The National Centre for Accessible Transport funded by Mobility Foundation aims to kind of shape the future of traffic systems, hopefully, but, we'll see. But at least it's some of the track record of actually influencing inclusive transport systems and models with disabled people. So we'll see what influence they have going forward, because that's an area that's obviously regressed. And if anything, it's seeing more and more stories of inaccessible transport issues for disabled people, not less. So, they don't have their work out for them, but we wish them all the best and hope, going forward they'll have to show natural policy. And we invest in that area also. Some unneeded improvement. The next articles from the BBC website, and the headline is reforms and system that will face billions in extra costs, ministers warned. Supporting children with special educational needs and disabilities send in England will cost the government an extra £3 billion a year by 2029. If the system is not reformed, a think tank has warned. The government is already spending £12 billion this year in supporting those with SEND, a figure that has risen by 66% in the last decade. Under government projections, there will also be an extra 220,000 children and young people with education, health and care plans, ECPHPs by 2029, the Institute for Physical Studies says. Spokesperson for the Department of Ed, Adrian, says the IFC report is further evidence of a broken SEND system. It's government limited. A rising of children in SEND supported schools is driven by the IFC calls a dramatic and ongoing increase in spending. The truly shocking thing, reading from quote here, the truly shocking thing is that despite the increase in spending, we're still left with a system that's trying to cope with the needs of these children and young people. Dina Sojum, Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, said 1 in 5 pupils, 1.7 million, can get some kind of support for special educational needs in England at the moment, and 482,000 of them, or 5.3% of all pupils, get a high level of support from medical individual HCPs, a legal document setting out child's tailored support needs which councils have to provide and pay for. The rising cost of SEND support have forced local authorities into hundreds of millions of pounds of debt. A government agreement meant councils have been able to keep SEND deficits off their financial books, and now they're calls for the total debt, which is forecast to reach £5 billion next year, to be wiped completely. Amanda Hopgood of local government association said that would put councils on a stable financial footing, as well as addressing outdated legislation that leaves councils facing rising and essential costs. Neva Wilson, Liberal Government's spokesperson on education, said councils have been pushed to the brink, adding the vulnerable young people are being set up to fail. AFC is predicting that the proportion of pupils with HPs will rise even further in the next 4 years to 8% for pupils. He goes on, but that's the gist. I'm sure this article was along these lines from, I think it might have even been from the same think tank, IFC, appeared in the news a month ago. I think I remember doing this story. So they're saying it's going to cost to rise and face billions in extra cost by 2029, an extra £3 billion a year. But what? Again, obviously cost, I understand, but I think it's, to say despite billions being brought to the system, or system to do what? As I said, to do what? So fifth purpose. System that parents are crying out and saying they can't get EHCPs for their child, and when they are implemented, it feels like the support isn't being implemented to the best of their abilities. I mean, the rise in EHCPs may be previously could be because there's an increase, particularly neurodiversity being since being a peak in diagnosis across the board. Adults and children, particularly in the last 5 years, we've seen massive increase in ADHD diagnosis and autism diagnosis. So it could just be that more of these conditions being picked up, or it could be other factors, socioeconomic factors, like I said before about the rising costs in terms of benefiting young people. You look at what they've been for in the last 5 years in terms of the pandemic, the effect that the pandemic had on them in terms of education, isolation, and so forth, and trying to readjust a world that already didn't have much for them. And when you look at those the barriers that face of people today, you add that to maybe health needs that haven't been picked up on before, then I can easily understand it. Some of it could just be that these joints needs been diagnosed more effectively than they were previously, but also there's a problem with the system because keep throwing money at the problem. But the in protocols aren't working for the individuals that they're meant to work for, because it's meant to be a person-centered plan, and you've got class sizes, particularly in mainstream schools, etc., and so forth. There's talk of, I think the last article, there was talk of the need for more special schools, etc., and so forth. Now, I'm not saying special schools don't have their place, and I think there's certain demographic of people that probably do need them kind of function in mainstream schools, even in further units, which even now even the name seems isolationist, etc., and so forth. However, I would want to go completely back to the system that I was educated in the late 80s and early to mid 90s. Late 90s. Special school system, which seems so far isolated in terms of outcomes to mainstream schools. But they do have their place. But whatever system you put in place, whatever strategies you put in place, they've got to work. It seems to me that it's not just a case of finding more money, it's a case of what is wrong with the strategy, what is wrong with the actual system is broken. Whether it's trying to access it, or whether it's actually do these plans actually work, do the professionals are actually implementing these plans, have the skills and the ability and support systems to actually implement them with individuals, one-to-one pupils. And it seems as though in a lot of cases that might not be the case. So again, I go back to what I said previously about, we seem to love good money off the bat about reform, etc., so forth, drilling down into political policy and the actual processes of how you actually realise this policy in real life in terms of systems and etc., and so forth, and do they actually work? Because it seems like a system to reform, not just in education, but all over the political landscape, whether Department B, whether housing, etc., and so forth. It's for the same policies recycled and the same problems as it to exist without any real significant change to the nuts and bolts of how they delivered. And yes, money is important. Money makes the world go around, but putting more money into a system to deliver the same outcomes because the processes are wrong, you're not going to solve anything. So I think, again, in new ideas and a wholesale review of what the outcomes are, what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve them, and a whole redesign of that system. And I think, much like with adults, disabled young people who can contribute, those who do have the ability to have a voice in terms of how that system works for them. Obviously, parents need a voice as well. I think pupils and school leavers, those have maybe been out of the system for 5 years or whatever, or maybe in higher education, whatever, perhaps need to have input into that as well than adults. And experiences need to be sought and, really engaged with in terms of how to shape the future of the system as well. Because ultimately, the they're the ones receiving this education. Obviously, there's experts. They're not going to be experts in terms of the delivery of education, but in terms of how it goes and the outcomes, they report and multiply. And that's true of the welfare system as well. I think, in true engagement, however that looks, obviously it's not an easy thing to do, but, something desperately wrong with the system and won't just be fixed by more money or cuts, in my opinion. The fine story comes to the Metro, and the headline is, our dispute is on merchants' things about us, we're just like everyone else. Christina Fazy was 21 years old when the Department of Work and Pensions gave some simple advice. Sign up for benefits. This was the mid-1990s. Christina, now 52, tells Metro when dispute protections and mutual access were next to non-existent. She has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, ADS, a group of varied disorders that affect the tissues that hold us together, such as skin and muscles. I continued to create art for my own sanity and pleasure and got involved in multi sports. Christina then recently faced a graduate course. Within a few years, Christina represented Paralympics GB in water basketball at both the 2000 Sydney and 2004 Athens Games. But Christina's ADS took a toll, as did her other conditions including POTS, which makes her heart rate sore after even motor activities. Showing into work, her friends had an idea, want to make art a new career. Now Christina is headlining Battersea Art event for Liberty Festival. The May of London sends Disability Arts and Culture programme on an endorsement there. The festival is part of celebrates London Borough of Wandsworth tenure and London Borough of Culture. But the presenting artist, Anshul Ahmed, who created to capture the forest, an installation for people who can't access nature, herself included. I don't think people in this study started to live with constant pain and dysfunction nervous system machine at this. It's a constant battle for juggling multiple symptoms of hurting body. And it's exhausting. Simple things like washing my hair or spending 3 hours can leave me nauseous dizzy with this fear back pain. More than 16.1 million people in the UK have disability, imagine to roughly 1/4 of working-age adults and 45% of patients. Yet 3/4 of people have experienced ableism in the last 5 years. A survey by the charity Scott found some people accuse them of faking their conditions or making judgments about what they're capable of. Vicky Hawkins now was hard to be judged. She's neurodiverse dancer and choreographer at the Blink Theatre Company, a charity in 9 Amps. With a troupe, she'll perform in the semi-improvised Elvis died of Burgers today. Its performance, Vicky shows is, it's nothing to do with the fact that she's disabled. But the hardest things we find is as collective, we don't find us stupidest emotions who think about us. They're just a component of our personalities, like having brown hair or like in football, she tells Metro. We've been told by venues when we've been pitched our shows that they would get booked us, but there's already another company like us for the year. What they mean is that another person or another company has to have someone who's disabled in their cast. So performers and theatregoers have long been forgotten by venues, not only able to access changing rooms or description that are not streamed of relaxed performances where audience can make noise. Aggie Dole, inclusion manager of the Battersea Arts Centre, tells Metro that there are many reasons for this. Throughout most of our history, disabled people are seen as nothing but wrong with the individual. The able person needs to change film society. Therefore, processes, buildings, companies and institutions all been built without disabled people in mind. Art spaces are no different. Ellie Griffiths, who is disabled, is the director of Holy Card, which creates sensory theatre for young disabilities. One reason Carp Fox and half disabled babes enjoyed it, so they're more inclined to embrace theatre as they grow older. You should also have theatre because you're not over clever enough, because you don't understand the language that formed it. You're not going to spend your hard-earned money and go back. But we're working towards a future where every show is made with consideration of people for the most part to access it. First integrated process. Government still certain welfare programs, including ones related to disabled people, is difficult to come into force this year. They push next year to be applicants. Without these checks and pasted, mid-pro, to 50 people, mainly 67 people, be pushed into poverty. 20 sprint stakes. Some of these cuts already having access to work won't help disabled people in the workplace, which Christina relies on as recently as last. For unconfirmed back to the 90s, when I left tuning in, there's no access, and did repeat at all could do so on and see. She still remains optimistic. The future of disability art in the UK is bright one. She says though, changes in May, and there's a lot of speak out. Yeah, and I miss that. But no, seems a good event. I have to add as well that this article was posted in before October, so the 8th September, so that festival that we refer to as that ended, but it's good to say that there is some disability arts festival in prominent cultural institutions happening, and we need more of that really. I know there's Queer Theatre, another theatre group that specialise in disability arts, but I think we need more prominent art in public spaces, and it's good to see stories like that, although the same themes are there we've heard previously around access and access to work, arts, such and so forth. But the fact that you've got practitioners out there on their work in public places is a positive thing, and more power to them, and we see more of that. And that's all this episode. Thanks for listening. See you next time.